It looks like it might be going through this time. We're good, Mike.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending our meeting today. So I wanted to call the meeting to order at 10 o'clock on November the 4th, 2020. And let's see, Tanya. Yep, Tanya, you're here. Can you do the roll call, please?
Sure. Jordan Basham.
Here.
David Brinkley.
Here.
Brian Campbell.
Here.
Rachel Cato.
Present.
Jordan Cole.
I'm here.
Emily England.
Oh, I think Emily's going to either not be able to be here or be late.
Okay. Anthony Gilbert.
Here.
Monica Hine.
Present.
Julia Johnson.
Present.
Lancaster.
Here.
Mike Loftus.
Here.
Lauren Ocello. Jared Smith.
Here.
Jared's here.
Here.
Rhonda. Doug Tate.
Here.
Robert Unseld. Tanya Vincent, present. Christopher Ware.
I'm present.
Jennifer Wilson.
Present.
Okay.
Tanya, we just had 2 participants join.
Okay.
Robert is here now. Robert, you there?
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Lauren's here as well.
I'm here. Lauren's here.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Robert.
Okay, let's move on to the officer and staff regent report. So I'm going to give the chair report first. Met with Tony Glisson and Sandra Humphreys last week in regards to restructuring the Staff Excellence Awards. There's some changes that I think we need to make on how that award is, how many awards we have and how they're determined and so forth. And they met with the workforce committee this morning, and we're working on trying to just develop a new system for that award to get more recognition for staff. And let's see, another announcement is, I guess while I was on vacation, I was in the mountains and got an email from the provost search committee needing the name for somebody to sit on the provost search committee from staff senate, and I scrambled around and I got to talk to Brian Campbell, and he agreed to serve on that committee. So thank you, Brian, and I know you do a great job representing staff on that committee. Another item that I think we need to focus on is to keep good track of things that we want to take to President Camboni, like during our meetings. And if there's things that come up, we need to kind of take note of that during our discussions. And at the end of the meeting, if anything comes up, we just kind of like finalize that list. And so sometimes I normally meet with the chair, meets with President Camboni once a month. And right now I normally meet with him on the 4th week of the month. And so if something comes up between our meeting, I guess from our monthly meeting and my meeting with President Camboni, we can also get those items added, and we add something to the agenda. I can send that out to the group before, and then kind of let everybody know, I guess, what come of those discussions for different items that staff senate may want to take to the president. And also, I found out that we should, and a lot of people have been asking about the operations for campus after the fall/Thanksgiving break. And I've been told those will be coming out very soon. to give some more guidance on how the campus will be running after that time up to the spring semester. And something else that we're going to start working on very soon is the staff engagement survey. We're going to send out the survey in January, and Jordan Basham has agreed to chair that committee for us to get that going. So we're going to start working on taking the questions we've asked before, and then kind of just look and see what kind of input we need from staff before we send it out. And we always give those survey results to the president and David. I think they're also given to the Board of Regents as well, right?
That is correct.
All right, so that's all I have for the chair report. Monica, do you have a vice chair report?
Workforce Development Committee met today. We met with the chair, Tony Glisson, and Sandra Humphreys, discussed some things as what Mike was discussing. And then also we're still working on a policy and also the staff engagement survey that will come out in January. Jordan Basham thankfully agreed to be the chair of that. And still just working to get some things done as far as staff, Senate for staff under workforce development, and we'll continue to do so. And that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Chris, do you have a technology report?
I have nothing significant to report. I'm going to defer to Jennifer. I'm not going to steal what she has to say. She put a lot of work in on what we've met with this morning. So nothing for me this time.
All right. Well, that leads. I'm sorry. Somebody saying something? Okay. So Jennifer Wilson, do you have a communication report? You're muted, Jennifer.
Your mic, Jennifer. You got to unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. Just a couple of items of business we discussed this morning. As you may or may not have noticed, we've updated the senator information with the quotes finally on the website, and we are complementing that. You may have noticed on our social media, we're just slowly putting out different senators, and can't put all the quote on Twitter because it limits you, but just to get information out there about our senators, why they're interested in being on the Senate, and hopefully that'll encourage some people that might be interested in the Senate in the future. Also, we had discussed, as was referenced in the minutes from the last meeting, about a page on or a section on our website for the Staff Senate that would hold links to staff resources. And we talked about that a little bit more this morning. Very much in the formative stages, but we had discussed how it might be meaningful, much like other universities do, to have a button that says staff resources, and you can go to that, and it may link our staff to HR if they have an HR question, maybe about something specific. Maybe they have questions about COVID. So we have the links and the names and the information for people to go for that. The ombudsman could be on there, just lots of different links, maybe parking and transportation, just various common questions that staff may have. We could put on our website as a resource for staff if they just want to go to our page. Sometimes it's the entire WKU website can get overwhelming. So we thought this might be helpful if staff want to refer to it. We welcome any ideas or thoughts on that, as well as any potential links that you think need to be up there. So it's at this point, we're very in the formative stages. And in terms of staff recognition, we'll talk about that later on the agenda.
Tanya, is there a secretary report?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. Doug, is there a parliamentarian report?
No report today.
No report. And we cannot get a treasury report. Emily is not able to attend at the moment. And I think that's all the officers. You got all the officers? Okay. Okay, David, is there a staff regent report?
There is. We had committee meetings that began October 23rd at 9 a.m. There was a pretty packed agenda prior to those meetings, as has been for the last several months, and they have been very gracious about this. Susan, Rebecca, and Christy Smith spent about an hour with well, this one was a little over an hour, with faculty regent and I. And we had questions related to some of the proposed things on the items of the committee meetings, got great answers to those. The one that probably had the most discussion was the Truist Bank $10 million line of credit that the university was applying for. And the questions were around, why does the university need this if there's a large cash amount in the bank at the beginning of each fiscal year? You know, if you get $100 million in the bank, why do you need a $10 million line of credit? This was, as we discovered, and I did not know this, so this was new to me. This is standard practice. It wasn't something that, you know, when we think about a line of credit, most of us probably think about a credit card, except for the accounting people on here. And we think about carrying a balance. This was described to me as more of a, in case of emergency, overnight transaction type thing, where we wouldn't necessarily carry a balance for more than a few days, even a day. They're on the call today and can elaborate if I misspoke on any of that, but I was satisfied with the answers, and so was Klaus, and that passed without really any discussion. There are 3 new regents: Curry Milliken, who's a local Bowling Green attorney; Jan West, who is a Louisville attorney. They are both governor appointees. Then Garrett Edmonds is the new SGA regent, replacing Will Harris. As many of you know, if not everyone, Klaus did not win his re-election bid for regent and was replaced by Shane Spiller from Gordon Ford College of Business. I had an opportunity during and after the committee meeting on the 23rd to meet and talk to him. I feel like he has, as I did 2 years ago, a bit of a learning curve to the processes and how you represent your constituency. And I think everything's just going to be fine there. During the meeting, there was an auditor's report and financial statements presented. There was a lengthy discussion about the assigned retirement liability. Some people, when they look at the university audit, they freak out and say, my goodness, look at this huge hundreds of millions of dollars in negative numbers. And that's an amount that's assigned to the university by the state. The university really has no control over that. And that's really a recent development. Just a few years ago, there was a government accounting standards change. I believe it started with GASB 68, which is a audit method, and really caused us to have to list those, even though they're sort of an indirect liability. I hate to say that way, but it just doesn't give an accurate reflection. So there was discussion about, you know, a lot of people, when they look at the financial health of an organization, will look at the net position at the end of a year. And because these audit features are, the retirement liability features are assigned, it makes that very difficult to get from the net position. There was a review of the WKU incident response plan. I had a couple of questions for Greg Hackbarth. Everything was answered. Dr. Logan presented the new scholarship model. If you all are not familiar with that information, I would encourage that you go take a look at it. It's a really comprehensive approach to a laundry list of ways that students can really discount their admission to the university. We had a closed session to discuss some litigation, and then the only other thing that came out of that was, you all should know that, and this continues to be my priority, and I had a couple of little productive discussions related to that with other board members. the restoration, if possible, and I want to stress the words if possible, of the staff and faculty salary reductions that have been imposed, only if possible. But everyone knows that's a priority. We've communicated that all the way up and down the chain to the regents, to the administration. And if it is possible, we will probably be able, if it's possible, I want to stress, I can't say that enough. We might be able to do that. But that remains probably my highest priority. And if you all need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out anytime. That's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, David. All right, committee reports. Does the Budget and Finance Committee have anything to share? That I know that Emily's not here, but okay. Communication report. Is anything else that y'all need to share that's not on the agenda?
No, I think Jennifer touched on everything.
And it's the Workforce Committee. All right. And University Committee. Is there any report?
No, not at this time. Unless Jerry, did you have anything you wanted to talk about? Okay.
Okay. Well, now that we've finished all our reports, let's move to our guest speaker or speakers, Susan Howarth and Rebecca Russell, and they're going to be presenting on how the WKU budget is developed. And I really appreciate Susan and Rebecca's time to come here and speak with us on this topic today.
Okay, so thank you, Mike, and the entire Staff Senate for asking us to come and share. I tell you what, I'm kind of like, I'm multitasking these days. And so I may have to move my computer in order to, for those of you who don't know, my mother broke her leg or hip. And so I'm watching her and she's upstairs and I'm downstairs and she's yelling for me right now. So I may have to move my spot here. And so if I do, I apologize. It's just bad timing right now. So I talked about doing this with the Staff Senate some time ago about Becca and I coming to talk about basically budgeting 101 so that everyone understands really what goes into building the budget. So Anthony, next slide, please. So if you look at the primary budget drivers, there's the primary revenue sources for the budget are state appropriations and tuition revenue. And then if you break down tuition revenue further, it's basically driven by two primary factors, which is your student enrollment and your tuition rates. So really, those are the large two revenue items that goes into building basically your revenue budget. And always remember, your expenditures are driven by what your revenue is. And and I just wanted to tell Becca, I can't see you, Becca, but if you have anything to add that I'm forgetting, please jump in there.
I sure will. Yep.
And then I think it's fair to say, which you'll see in a minute, that we're really a tuition-driven institution. As state appropriations have been cut over the years, the amount of money that we're generating from tuition revenue far exceeds the amount we get from the state. So next slide. So our state appropriation is currently 73.3 million. And a little bit about the state budget. We're basically working on a biennial budget where the budget is set for 2 years. However, this year, the legislative body only set a 1-year budget, primarily because of COVID. And every other year, typically, WKU will submit a biennial budget request to the CPE. Then CPE takes all of the collective institutional request and bundles it into a request for the higher education of Kentucky. And basically the state budget then that they give to us in form of state appropriation is tied to direct appropriation. And then we get special funding for the Gatton Academy and the Kentucky Mesonet. And we also sometimes have received some additional funding for our retirement contributions. So next slide. So again, keep in mind, the state appropriation is about 73.3 million. You see our tuition and fee budget is 165.9 million. So it far exceeds what we're receiving from the state. And our tuition, the CPE has the statutory authority for setting tuition for all state institutions. Probably up until about 15 years ago, the CPE, or as it used to be called the CHE, the Council for Higher Education, passed that statutory authority down to the institutions, and institutions would then set their own tuition rate. That got a little out of control at one point, where some institutions were setting tuition very, very high every year. So the CPE took that back. And so what they've done in the recent past is they set an upward parameter that institutions cannot exceed. So for example, what they would do is they would set an upward parameter for the research institutions, WKU of L, another parameter for the comprehensive institutions, and then yet a lower parameter for the technical colleges. And so, typically what would happen then if they set say a 5% ceiling, most institutions would go up to the 5% or whatever that ceiling was. You'll notice that we've changed how we refer to tuition revenue at the institution. And rather than looking at strictly FTE as far as enrollment, we're now looking at net tuition revenue. And that's simply tuition revenue less your financial aid, because that's really the money you're receiving, because you have to fund the financial aid from that. And just to give you some perspective, because I always like to say budgeting is not high level mathematics. It's really pretty simple. It's basically pluses and minuses. And so just to kind of break it down to the most lowest level, for every 1% tuition rate increase, that generates for us about $660,000 in net tuition. So keep that number in mind when we start talking about the expenditure side. So you can see if your state is, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but if your state is keeping your funding flat, or in most recent, cutting your appropriation, your tuition rate increases aren't generating a whole lot of money. So hence the reason we've had years and years of internal budget cuts. Next slide. So looking at the primary expenditure drivers. Okay, so during my career, the question always comes up, not just from the staff, but faculty, staff across campus. Okay, so you usually typically hear from the students, why are you increasing our tuition? I always said, we don't like to increase tuition. We wish the state would give us more money, but it becomes a matter of necessity in order to fund your fixed cost. And then the typical other side of the equation from your faculty and staff is, why can't we get a salary increase? Well, keep that $660,000 generated by a 1% tuition rate in mind. So a 1% salary increase for our campus cost an additional $1.3 million. So you can see if you had no fixed cost, the state did not cut your budget, you would have to increase tuition by 2% just to cover a 1% salary increase. That's close, not exact, but close. Beyond our personnel budget, the next highest expense is our student financial aid, which is about 20% of our budget. Other operating expenses, including utilities, is about 15%. Thank you. Becca, anything you have to add on that? Because I am going to move upstairs, okay?
Okay. I can go ahead and move forward if you want while you're walking.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
And I
Anthony, go
apologize.
ahead, next slide. I'll pick it up. Okay, so Susan kind of hinted at this a little bit as she was kind of walking through the expense side of things, but we just kind of want to give you guys an idea of like a hypothetical year, kind of how we start this process and what we think, what things look like. So in a hypothetical year, if we're fortunate, our state appropriations would hold flat to the prior year. As Susan sort of hinted, we did not see that this year when we set the FY21 budget, but we'd like to start the year hoping that those would hold flat. And then, generally speaking, in the last few years, we've seen tuition increases somewhere in the range around 2 or 3%. So if that was to occur in a given year, a 2% increase would result in roughly about 1.3 million in net revenue. So Susan mentioned earlier, a 1% increase is around that $660,000 mark for net tuition. So if we did a 2%, we'd see roughly a $1.3 million increase in revenue. Next slide, Anthony. So then kind of look at the expenditure side. Even though our revenue may not be increasing in high amounts, our expenses almost always increase. We have things called fixed costs. That may be increases in utilities, increases in contracts, increases across the board. So in a given year, let's say we have around 500,000 in fixed cost increases and a hypothetical 1% salary adjustment. Those two expenses together combine to an increase of 1.8 million. And as you can see, our revenue did not go up by the same rate. So this would actually result in an unbalanced budget to the tune of $500,000 because our revenue would be less than our expenses. So you can kind of see that even though we had flat appropriations and a 2% increase in tuition, our expenses still exceeded that revenue because the two didn't match at the same rates. So I'll go ahead and Anthony to the next slide. We had that happen this year. Our revenue did not meet our expenses for several reasons. And Susan, I'll let you jump back in if you want to. I don't want to speak over you.
Oh, no, you're doing a great job. And again, I apologize for having.
Okay.
But
sure, I'll keep going.
My life right now.
There's a lot going on, yeah. And you all might see my cat pop his little face up. So we're just going to keep going together. So we had that happen this year where our revenue did not meet our expense expectations for several reasons. Most of them you guys can see here on the slide are very much COVID related. We had a lot of decrease in revenue due to special events being canceled. State revenue expectations are less because of COVID, various different things. And our total revenue declined around 32 million. For all these various reasons, decreases in enrollment, decreases in fees, those decreases in state appropriation. We not only anticipate the decline from state revenue for COVID, but we also had our appropriation just generally decrease this year, and it did not hold flat. So we kind of had this face of 32 million less in revenue, but our expenses still went up. We still had fixed cost increases of roughly-ish 400,000 or so here for various different things. So go ahead and advance the slides, Anthony.
Yeah. Can I just?
So we got into his. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Susan. Yeah.
Can we go back to that slide real quickly? Thank you, Anthony. So the only thing I wanted to add here. Okay, so remember, these are budget projections that we built our budget on. Okay, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the enrollment because as it turned out, at least for the fall, was much better than what we budgeted as far as, so for example, when Becca put together the revenue budget, there were several things that we factored in. So we factored in 200 additional freshman students. We ended up with over 400 additional freshman students. Also, because of prior year enrollment declines, there are smaller classes moving through the pipeline. So your sophomore class is smaller, your junior class is smaller, and your senior class is smaller. So basically we had to build in that shortfall in the revenue, the smaller classes moving through the pipeline. And Becca, I believe that was around 7 million, 8 million, or yeah, something like that. And then we also built in an additional decline that we were anticipating directly related to COVID. So we built in an additional 5% decline that we felt we would see a decline in enrollment just because of kids not coming back to school because of the virus. So the good news of all of this is that because our freshman class went up not just the 200, but the 400, that helped to offset some of the smaller classes moving through the pipeline. We also did not see the 5% decline related to COVID that we had projected. So the good news is that for fall actually came in about 5 million over what we budgeted. So that is excellent news for the campus, particularly during a pandemic. And but I applaud the enrollment management efforts and the for the whole division of enrollment management and everything they did to land that freshman class. So that's excellent news. Also, I did want to talk about a little bit about the declines in state appropriation. That was directly related to performance funding. So all institutions are required to put into the performance, because remember, there is no new money from the state. So performance funding is basically redistributing money between institutions. So everyone has to put in a 2% stop loss, meaning it's kind of like what insurances do. You will not lose more than 2% of your state appropriation. So we had to put in about 1.4 million. Because remember, our state appropriation is 73 million. And then we gained back a little bit from the performance distribution. So we ended up losing about the 1.1 million. We also built an additional 10% decline because of anticipating the state revenue going down further than what was budgeted. And we will learn more about that probably in the November, December timeframe. So I say all this just to say this, as David was saying to you guys earlier, reporting on from the Regent's perspective, as I told the Regents at the meeting, I remain cautiously optimistic, and we will know more about what our state appropriation looks like. If 10% is, if it's a little high, if it's a little low, we'll know more about that when we return to campus after the holiday break. We'll also know more about our spring tuition at that point. That will be a critical time for us to reassess things that we can do differently on the expenditure side of the budget. All of those saving buckets we have in place. Once we know what our revenue looks like for the spring, we can reassess all that. Also, I will say this, the fixed cost increase that we put into the budget of 378,000, that's really next to nothing. We get a laundry list of fixed cost increase that we're just not able to fund, quite honestly. Anyway, Becca, not to steal your thunder, I'll let you move ahead.
No, that's just fine. It's we're here together. Go ahead, Anthony. You can move us forward again there. So in fiscal year 21, Susan sort of hinted to some of these, and in order to achieve that balanced budget, because, we must start the year with a balanced budget, we had to reduce our expenditures by around 27.1 million. Some of the revenue losses we experienced are in revenue dependent or revenue generating units. The expectation for those groups has always been that your expenses meet your revenue. So some of those losses were offset in those groups naturally. That's just how they operate. If their revenue goes down, so must their expenses. But that still left this $27.1 million hole that we had to close to balance the budget. And we deployed a dual strategy to do that. So we have some central savings buckets that Susan referenced just a few minutes ago, where we sort of have these shared sacrifices and all of these efforts that all of campus are participating in. And we're very grateful for everyone throwing in and doing their part in helping with these. Additionally, there are some divisional managed targets. So each of our vice presidents have a unit target that they're meeting and pushing to through the entire fiscal year to help us meet this balance. As things look, strong in the fall semester, as Susan said, we are very cautiously optimistic that things are going well. I actually just ran our November procurement spend reports that I use, that I run each month to see how we're trending. And we are trending down about 1.7 million in October over last year's spend. So everyone is doing an amazing job and being cautious and frugal. Together we'll meet these targets as we need to. But so you guys can see kind of what goes into the decisions that have to be made to balance the budget and get us started. Go ahead, Anthony. So with that, let's kind of move forward and think about how this process starts to work for FY22. And the chart you guys see on your screen right now is sort of all of the groups that play a part in setting and creating the budget each year. This is a process that all of our governance groups have a part in, they play a role in, as well as all the way to our Board of Regents when they receive the budget in May for their approval. So all of these groups put together some effort to help us create that budget in partnership, of course, with enrollment management, looking at what our enrollment's going to look like for the next year and what that means for our tuition budgets. Our college deans, of course, are also part of those conversations in the RAMP model. They have revenue targets that they are pushing towards to help us create the budget. So all of these groups play an integrated role, including this group, and the staff senate providing feedback to the budget executive committee as they go through and make decisions on how to make that budget balance. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah.
Just a few helpful definitions for you guys. Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah. So, Mike, I would encourage as we're moving through this budget cycle, I think it would be very important for, I don't know how this has been handled on campus in the past, but at my previous institution, I made a habit of meeting with a regular meeting with, could be the budget and finance committee of the staff senate or your executive committee. But I think it would be very, very important. Maybe it's the executive committee. I don't know, Mike, I'll let you and your officers decide. But I think it would be really important for Becca and myself to come and sit down with you guys and talk about, what budget requests are looking like, how revenue is, what we're forecasting as far as revenue, so that there's back and forth dialogue between the senates and us as we formulate what the budget's going to look like for the next year. I think that important, and that give and take is important for campus, so that, what happens sometimes, it's all kind of done in a vacuum, and then the budget's rolled out and people go, I don't remember talking about that, or so on and so forth. So Mike, just kind of keep that in mind as we move through the budget cycle. And you sit on the budget executive committee, so you can certainly help form that.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I really appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, Becca.
Yeah, so we just wanted to give you guys a few helpful definitions to keep in mind as you hear conversations around campus or hear terms as we get ready to start this process. When we moved and transitioned into the RAMP model this year on July 1st, a lot of new terminology came with it. And I know sometimes that doesn't always get out to campus, and we wanted to kind of remind you guys of some big ones there. So if you hear the phrase academic primary unit, that refers to our colleges, our primary tuition revenue generating units that they have credit hours that generate tuition revenue. We have our administrative support units, and these are groups who don't necessarily generate student credit hour production, but they serve to help the groups that do. So a good example of this would be like the Office of Admissions or Information Technology, for example. And we find those support units exist in all of our divisions. So even our colleges have support units that assist with the work around campus. Another good one to remember is unrestricted education and general funds. So we often refer to this as E&G funds. This is basically all of the unrestricted revenue in our budget that comes from either state appropriations or tuition and mandatory fees. It's just kind of a fancy way of saying the money in the budget. And then the flip side of that, of course, is restricted funds. And these are often dollars that come from federal, state, or local government that are for specific purposes, things like financial aid, for example, or grants and contracts that must be used for those purposes, and they cannot be used for other things. So we kind of put those in a bucket and remind ourselves that those are restricted, that they must be used for these specific purposes. Next slide, please. So we just want to refresh everybody really quickly on our governance committees. We have 3 at WKU. We have our operation Operating Allocation Committee. And we had a few new folks join that committee this year. But these are our folks who really work with the support units on a day in and day out basis. They are actually the group who are getting ready to hear fixed increase requests from all of our units on campus. That call actually went out on Monday. So those are the folks that are working with that group. Shout out to Brian. He's your representative on this committee. Next slide. We have our Operating Allocation Committee, and this group is really the Capital Allocation Committee, excuse me. And they are very much a part of our campus master plan. They talk through space for the ramp model, projects, construction, all of these wonderful things, and kind of the capital budget side of the budget. And this is chaired by Brian Russell, our Chief Facilities Officer, and Doug Tate is a representative from Staff Senate. He just joined that committee this year, so thank you to Doug for serving on that. And they actually are pushing to finish by this Friday for senior leadership an update to the square footage model that goes into ramp. So they have been very hard at work on that project. Next slide. And then we have our Budget Executive Committee, and this is the committee that Susan and our provost chair together. And that group, Mike serves as Staff Senate chair on this group, and they are the group who'll get sort of kind of all of the budget requests, all of the things that folks need, all of the conversations around how we set the FY22 budget sort of culminate coming to them together for a recommendation that goes to senior leadership. So they're the group who are going to hear the final requests from the OAC. They're going to hear the primary unit requests, kind of put those together into a recommendation that goes up to senior leadership and eventually to the Board of Regents for their thoughts and their comments and approval. Next slide.
I just wanted to add on the Budget Executive Committee, I just wanted to add that always keep in mind these committees make recommendations to leadership, and then it will be the decision of leadership as to what recommendations to take forward to our Board of Regents. And we always discuss budget decisions with our regents prior to presenting the budget.
So just a quick timeline for you guys to kind of know where we sit on the process for FY22. We actually just started this, as I mentioned earlier. Our chairs for the OAC sent out a call for FY22 fixed cost increase budget requests to our units on Monday. So we are very much getting that process started. So this month and into next, before we leave for our holiday break, those requests will be turned into the OAC. They're going to start their budget request hearings where groups will come talk to them about those requests, answer questions, present them, talk about their needs. And then they will send prioritization and comments on those requests to the Budget Executive Committee before we leave for break. Additionally, at the same time as that process is going on, our primary units are going to be talking about tuition revenue targets, sort of the targets that they need to meet in order to hit our revenue expectation and forecast. And that's a conversation that really happens in partnership between our enrollment management group, our deans, and senior leadership. But that's happening in parallel to this process. And then also our primary units will begin their budget requests with the provost before we leave for break. They're not due until we come back because the academic side is structured a little bit uniquely in the calendar, and that they often aren't going to be aware of their final faculty staffing needs, things like faculty promotions or sections that they need to be taught until around January. So they start their conversations with the dean and with the provost to let her know kind of what they think is coming, and then they have to finalize those after break, but we start those discussions now. Next slide, please. And then in 2021, when we return from holiday break, those primary unit requests, as I mentioned, will be due to the BEC. And the BEC will then start discussing all of those requests as a holistic view. So we're going to start looking at the support unit fixed costs. We're talking about what the primary units need, and they will review those together to put forth, as Susan mentioned, that recommendation to senior leadership and to the board. The other big thing to remember in January is that our state legislation is going to come back into session to set an FY22 state state budget. If you guys remember when Susan was speaking earlier, that this year, because of COVID, the state did not set a 2-year budget as per normal. We only set a 1 year. So in January, they have to come back into session and actually set a budget for FY22, which is very unusual. Typically, we'd already know that budget in this time frame, and we know what was coming. But because of this unique circumstances, we kind of have to wait and see what that looks like in January. I don't know if Susan would say it differently, but my guess is as good as yours as what that's going to look like in January. We don't really know a whole lot yet about what the 22 budget expectations might be. The CPE is working with the university presidents to talk through priorities to present at the state legislature session in January, but that is still kind of work that's ongoing. So keep an eye out for those conversations in January. And then really in February and March, those final budget recommendations from the BEC go to senior leadership. And we really get down into the detail work of creating the budget line by line, account by account, making changes to expenditures and revenues. And a lot of the work that my office does, the budget office does, gets done in those months. And then around April 15th, that's the right date, Susan, right? For the finalizing of the state budget, that's usually the expectation is April 15th.
April 15th.
Sometimes they have to go in a special session. Yep,
April
magic date,
15th.
April 15th. That's when we should know. In theory, that's when we should know what the state budget is. And that kind of like that final puzzle piece gets set. And then this year, the first week of May, we will present the budget expectations to the Board of Regents for what we're calling budget workshops, where we're going to do deep dives with them and answer any questions they have, walk through things, put things together for them in that first week of May, and then spend the rest of May and June actively monitoring enrollment, expectations from the state, anything, looking at our expenditure forecasts to make sure they're still accurate for a late June final approval by the Board of Regents for the FY22 budget. I think this year it's actually mid-June, around June 18th, something along those lines. So the bulk of our budget work really does happen in that January to April timeframe. So that's the busiest time of year for this process.
And let me.
What did I forget, Susan?
No. You did a great job, Becca. Thank you. Thank you for pinch hitting there.
So
I did want to add though, what makes an RCM, well, there's a lot of things that make an RCM or what we call the ramp budget very different, but typically we would, in the past, you'd start working on your tuition revenue budget in the January, February timeframe. The budget office would work with institutional research to make an enrollment projection. What you have to do in order to distribute the tuition revenue out to the units, which is what makes RCM very, very different than what we've done in the past. You have to start the enrollment projection process now. Actually, it really begins in earnest in September. And then through different scenario building that Becca and the budget staff will be working on, you start building different scenarios, and as you get closer and closer to finalizing that, you distribute it out to the units. Really, for RAMP or RCM to work at its best, since the deans are responsible for growing their revenues, they should really have their revenue targets as early as possible, so they can start actively doing things to increase enrollment, working with the admissions office and with VP Logan and his staff. So I just wanted to add that, Becca, because that's a critical
That's a great point. That's very different than what campus is used to. Absolutely. Yes. And as Susan has mentioned, we're working on those right now, actually. I've been working with Brian Denning in enrollment management. We've been talking through projections and what things look like. It's very different for campus to have those conversations now versus in January or February. So we're working through that together as a team, and it'll get more familiar, I promise, as we get through it. It's just a little bit different this year. And that's actually our final slide. So we're happy to open it up to questions and talk through anything that you all have that came up either during our presentation or has come up, before, or questions we can answer for you guys.
I have a question or two.
Yeah, of course.
And these aren't bad. These aren't gotcha questions. I just, for the sake of understanding, I have really a couple of different part questions. Mandatory student fees, those were mentioned under the E&G portion. Are those like directly applied to the specific areas that they're collected in? Is that correct?
Yes, they are, and they are governed by the CPE. That is something that we cannot raise without permission. We can't add to those fees without it going through the CPE for approval, and those dollars must be used for their purpose. At WKU, we have a couple of different buckets for those, but almost in their entirety, they're used for debt service to pay for projects that were approved by the CPE, including the DSU renovations and the building of a parking structure. So those dollars go directly towards that debt service each year.
Perfect.
And David, so to Becca's point about the tuition and mandatory fees, when the CPE sets a ceiling for the tuition rate, if you increase your mandatory fees, that limits the amount of tuition you can raise. So they look at it. So you can't raise, if they say we'll give you a 5% cap, that's tuition and mandatory fees.
Right.
Exactly.
And just to refresh the Senate, the Board of Regents had no appetite to raise tuition last year. I don't know if that appetite will return. I haven't had that discussion yet. Second quick question. So are deans, and I'm speaking now of college deans in this new model, are they required to track anticipated tenure related to promotions and notify you all with some sort of mechanism? Because when faculty, tenure track faculty, this is not something that just flies out of nowhere. It's something that for several years people are tracking, but are they responsible for that? Or do they sometimes hit, I don't know this, I don't want anybody to infer anything. Do they hit you at the last minute with something they didn't think would happen? I don't understand how, I'm just curious how that process works with you all.
You want me to take this one, Susan, or you want to answer?
You can go ahead.
Okay. They are tracked, and that is something that we go through and have conversations about each year in the budget setting process. So the timing of that is typically in January, sometimes February, and that sort of in the conversation about ramp, that feels it happens a little bit later than sort of the other big parts of ramp. But it is something that is tracked. That is something that they know, kind of, I don't want to say at the beginning of the year, but they're aware of who's available and eligible for promotions. And then those conversations around how that's awarded and who it's awarded to happen in academic affairs. And then they sort of communicate that to the budget office, and it comes through as a fixed cost increase. So it does come to the BEC for conversation around that as a fixed cost increase. The numbers we showed you guys earlier of this year's fixed costs did include some faculty promotions. And so those conversations do happen at the BEC and are part of their recommendations.
So
Yes.
just to clarify, so when the Dean's award or tenure is awarded, that is a guaranteed raise. That there's nothing really so that's why it comes across as a fixed cost.
Right.
There's nothing.
That's why it's the fixed cost. Exactly.
Typically,
yes, that's
you'll
exactly right, David.
Yeah,
the
typically,
amounts that you.
Yeah, typically what you would see is when a faculty member is awarded tenure and moves from assistant to associate, there's typically around a 10% increase associated with that. The same when they move from associate to the full professor status. So, what we did at my prior institution, which is how I'm trying to get us to think here, is rather than waiting so late in the process to put an amount in the budget, because what we've done in the past on campus is we wait till we know exactly how much we need for those faculty promotions and we put it in the budget. As our budget grows, as we become a much larger institution, we don't need that to be exact. You would probably put an estimate in. Let's say 400,000 has typically covered all of our faculty promotions in the past. So let's put a line item of 400,000. If that entire 400,000 is not required, it can sit there to fund any off-cycle promotions that come, because there's always one or two or three or four that comes off-cycle, and then you have to scurry around and try and find the money.
So then that sort of excludes itself from a regular dean budget process because they're applying an increase beyond what their annual allocation through ramp might be, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so they don't really have to keep track. That's just it's not a dig, it's just an observation. The last question I have, and I promise I'll be quiet for the rest of the call. When we talk about the $2 million reduction in the performance funding mechanism, so that's applied basically, my understanding is 35% student success, 35% course, so 70% is really tied to student-centric issues, and the remaining divisions of that really have to do with campus operations. Is there a way that the $2 million, I don't want to say reduction, but the $2 million difference, we know the source of the attribution of that reduction?
I'm sorry.
Do we know why we got reduced $2 million? Sorry.
Well, the part of it is that 2% stop loss, you know. So typically, David, like this is what I've always said, and we had a call this morning on performance funding review at the state level. Performance funding at states works best when there's new money. It's very, very difficult when we're trying to apply it because like I said, it's an allocation of the base. So the only way to make sure that institutions are not severely hurt is to put that 2% stop loss in. Now, from a legislative perspective, that's 2% is supposed to go away, and then everything's at risk. Now, that's what they're talking about right now, whether they keep that in place or not. So that's the 2%. And then you gain back money by meeting these performance metrics. So many of these, and then again, the performance metrics, how you meet them is a backward look. So you're like 1 year in arrears. So we're still competing with a UK when it was increasing and a Western when we were decreasing. So one might imagine that's why we were only successful in gaining so much back.
I appreciate the clarity. Thank you all.
Susan, I had a quick question, or maybe just some clarification. When you were going through the slides, I looking at the budget executive committee members. It looked like there were several faculty representatives on that, but there's only one staff. Am I correct, or did I misread that?
There's actually two.
Yeah, sort of, Lauren. So the faculty representation, there's a member from the staff senate and then a non-staff senate representative, and the same thing for staff exists. So the staff senate representative is, of course, Mike as the staff senate chair, and then the second staff member who is not related to staff senate is Brian Denning.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Susan, looking at the number of, looking at the state appropriation and then tuition and fees revenue that we bring in. So is it fair to say approximately like 30% of our budget is state appropriations?
Yeah.
Okay. So do we have numbers? What was that, say, like 15 years ago before the state started like reducing our budget? Just kind of get in mind like how much things has changed.
Yeah, typically what you've seen, and I don't know our exact numbers right now. I think we had that in the budget book though, Becca. What you typically would see is where the lines are crossing. Like at one point, your state appropriation was way up here and now it's down here, and your tuition and fees were down there and now it's up there. So basically we've gone from what we like to call a kind of a public institution, being a public institution where the state was funding us well, now to almost where you're kind of just like state assisted rather than state supported.
So a good number, Mike, just hopefully I can help make this sense. So in the budget book this year, we had a graph that showed the general fund appropriation for FTE per FTE or full-time enrolled equivalent student at WKU. And in the 1998 budget year, that amount was a little over 8,000 per student. That number is now 4,000 per student over
That kind of
the last
that
several
kind of,
years.
yeah, that kind of sums it up. You know,
Mhm.
that the state was, now it's supporting each student a half.
Half. Mm-hmm. Yep. I wanted to double check before I said it was around half, but yeah.
So all of you all go out there and bug all those newly elected politicians out there.
Tell them to support higher ed.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Just send
so
them a WKU email.
that is an example though of where legislative priorities are focused away from higher education. And when we talk about elections having consequences, this is not a party issue. This is an overall feeling that the Commonwealth has in the legislature. And it's part of the reason that I have publicly said that I think CPE is useless. But I can say that, not a lot of other people can, because I feel like their legislative effort is not strong enough on advocacy for the increase, because they have not demonstrated to a fairly fiscally conservative bodies in the state legislature, and that's not a criticism, that's good right now, the importance of higher education. And I know the presidents are trying, they have been for years, and it's just an uphill battle right now.
Yeah, and that's excellent points. One of the primary points of the CPE is advocacy, and that they just don't do that well, to David's point. And Kentucky is one of, I want to say, 2, 3, 4, 5 states that has not started reinvesting in higher education. All the other states have started. And it just is, it's tough. So you go back to that question that I posed when we first started out with this discussion. Your students, are we financing the university on the backs of the students? Because if you don't get any state money and you don't raise tuition, there's not much you can do. It's a double-edged sword. Any other questions for us, Mike?
Does anybody else have any questions? Another question? Susan or Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time to cover all these different issues and explain it. You broke it down very well, and I really appreciate the time that y'all put in the effort to give us this presentation.
And I did sincerely want to continue the consultation with the Senate throughout the budget process. So Mike, you can just let us know how you want to move forward and what group we should move forward with.
Good. Yeah, I definitely will. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, and thank you, Julia, for sharing Star with me.
I know, I was going to say that before we left. That was great. Thank you. We miss her.
I know.
All right. Thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the staff senate business, and the only thing that's on our agenda for that is the staff recognition, and Jennifer Wilson is going to be leading that discussion.
Yeah, we met last week. The committee did. Tanya, Rachel, Leslie Vanderpool, who's just a staff member at large, Jared, and myself. And we discussed a general purpose for the staff recognition and put together a proposal that you should have all received as an attachment in an email for review. Basically, we're wanting to do something to recognize our staff throughout WKU's campus on a regular basis, something more than just a once a year recognition type thing, to show the staff senate's appreciation for the great work that employees are doing here all across campus, to spotlight our staff in a positive manner, generating goodwill, and to try to help build a little culture again where employees are feeling valued and respected. So those are the main purposes we had in mind for this. And the basic concept, I don't want to go through all of it. You all have probably reviewed it, but to encourage university employees to recommend a staff member from any area on campus to be considered either part-time, full-time, any staff member that works at WKU for recognition. And we put together a few guidelines. They're not, the drill down details, but the short of it is to have a location on the WKU Staff Senate webpage where people can put in a recommendation and put their name on there. We won't necessarily communicate who's recommending the person when we actually spotlight the staff member. We'll just put all the focus on the staff that are being spotlighted. The idea is to have maybe a limit of 3 per month to keep it manageable in terms of communication. And I guess to keep a distinct feel for the actual staff being recognized for that particular month. So we wanted to put that out there with the Staff Senate, open it for discussion, see if you've got a favorable opinion on this process. And of course, we welcome any ideas or suggestions that the Senate may have. I hear crickets.
Well, I think, Jennifer, we did a pretty good job of getting everything out there. And I mean, we laid it out pretty good so that, and I think it's a work in progress too. We definitely, after we go through a couple months of, if we see things, we need more people, or if we need, there had been talk about allowing students to nominate staff members as well. So this is not something set in stone. We definitely want to take it, month by month, but definitely get something in place so that we can recognize the staff members out there.
Okay, does anybody have anything else on that? I just want to thank everyone for the work they put on this, and I think it's just a great way to help build morale and just creating a positive culture. So anything we can do to make the staff experience better, the better. Okay. Well, I guess next on our agenda is the staff sending emails. I guess the only email that questions I really remember seeing this month was just regarding like what's going to happen after fall break, Thanksgiving break time frame. And I guess, and I said in my chair report, that should be hopefully coming out very soon to give more direction. Was there any other emails that maybe I didn't see? I think that was about it. Okay. All right. Well, I guess our next staff senate meeting will be on December 2nd.
Hey, Mike, we need to approve the minutes.
Oh, I always miss something on the agenda. So thank you for reminding me, Tanya.
Yeah, maybe should we do that when I do my secretary report? Maybe I should put that in part of that. And is that something we could do so that we get that approval? I mean, would that be appropriate? Maybe we could talk about it.
We can always start it out. I mean, we can maybe make
I
that.
think, well, I think for proper parliamentary procedure, I think it probably should stay the way that it is. And I just skipped right over it, went to committee reports, and that was on me. Okay, so Doug, do you have a different opinion on that?
No, it should stay the way it is currently.
Yeah.
I would say it's just a good check. Tanya, if we get to your report, your officer report, and we haven't done it, we could stop and do it then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So can I have a motion for approval of the minutes that sent out to the staff senate members?
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Brian, and okay, Robert.
Yes, second.
Robert seconded. Okay. All right. So let's looks like everybody. Rachel, Jordan, can you get on camera so we can everybody can just raise a hand? Okay,
Yeah, I'm here.
those in favor of approving the minutes as submitted? All right, those opposed? Okay. All right, the motion to approve the minutes. All right. Yeah, thank you, Tanya, for reminding me of that. Okay, so like the announcements, our next meeting is on December 2nd. And I guess that is everything on the agenda. Does anybody else have anything to add before we conclude our meeting? All right. All right. Thank you very much for your time. And just a few more weeks before we get to the Thanksgiving break, and that'd be nice. So, okay. If anybody needs anything, feel free to reach out to Staff Senate. All right. Thank y'all. Y'all enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye.
See you later, alligators.
Thanks, Mike.
After a while, crocodile.